sharp time for us to focus upon this important topic. Just a few introductory comments from me by way of background. I've been involved in the management of council farms for more years than I care to mention. And I think I've had the privilege of supporting over 500 new entrants into council farms over that particular time. And for me, the great days in the farming calendar were always the farm viewing days, when farms to let were open for prospective applicants, their families, their advisors and their dogs to turn up at the farm to view and to look around. And it was always a real pleasure to be able to talk to them and to tap into their ideas. And then at interview, issues and criterion such as finance, experience, qualifications were important. But for me, the two most important criteria were ideas, and above and beyond everything else was enthusiasm. The bringing in of new blood, vitality, and ideas to the industry is as vital now as it was 10, 20, 40, 50 years ago. And I can recall one of the standard questions that I used to ask at interview, or one of the final questions of prospective applicants, was, what on earth makes you want to give up a secure job as a head herdsman, farm foreman, a salaried position, to take on the millstone of a county council smallholding, with all the risks and challenges and hard work that involves? And the answer invariably came back: I want to be my own boss. I want to be my own boss. So that, I think, speaks volumes for the sorts of people that we're able to attract to our industry. Anyway, enough from me. We now have 3 5-minute presentations, and it's a real pleasure to be able to invite Lord Courier Hull to speak to you. So, Don, over to you.
Thank you, Charles, and good morning, everyone. It's really good to see you all on this call, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion later. Can I first of all commend CPRE for drafting this report and stimulating this discussion. Some of us have been, seems like, concerned about the future of county council farms forever. I've had numerous conversations in the past with George Dunn and yourself, Charles, and others, and we are still wrestling with how we deal with this and retain this, what I regard as a crucially important national asset. We are meeting at a time when we are facing the greatest upheaval in agricultural policy in a lifetime, in my lifetime. And we're doing that also now when the world has become a much more unstable place. We've had COVID, which has been a dreadful experience. And we now have war in Ukraine, which was, perhaps we were complacent, but unthinkable even a few months ago. Both of these events, I think, have had an impact on our policy of globalization, where we have assumed that we can purchase anything and everything cheaper somewhere in the world. That strategy, to me, is no longer a sensible approach. And how we use our farmland against this backdrop, our very, very precious asset of farmland, is becoming ever more important. We have the challenge of reaching net zero by 2050 or 2040, if you take the NFU's ambition in agriculture. We have the challenge of restoring.
Don, I think you've muted yourself.
Sorry, I didn't mute myself. So
someone did that, maybe to you. Sorry.
Sorry, I don't
Fine now.
Sorry, I don't know where I got to when it muted.
Don, you were muted literally for about 10, 20 seconds.
No okay, more. Well, let me just go back. So I was saying that we face the challenge of net zero, addressing our carbon footprint by 2050, 2040, if the NFU ambitions realised. We need to restore habitats. We have an ambition to stop biodiversity loss by 2030 and addressing the whole issue of biodiversity, which is a huge challenge. We have food security that's becoming ever more important every day. We have energy security, and we have the health of our nation. These are huge issues and will be challenging for the agricultural sector to balance these competing demands. And it will need enthusiastic young people with ideas, to use your comment, Charles, equipped to cope and thrive in this digital age. It's the age of artificial intelligence, when business and technical skills are going to be crucially important. And which is why I was involved in the establishment of TIER, the Institute for Agriculture and Horticulture, to try and make sure we have a professional industry that's viewed as professional and able to compete in the labour market. And so attracting the right people, younger people, who are enthused by the challenges I've just outlined, is absolutely critical for the future success of agriculture. We've talked a lot in the past about a farming ladder, and I've been concerned for a long time that some of the rungs in the farming ladder are beginning to disappear. And so the opportunity for someone to start on a county council farm and progress through the industry is becoming ever more challenging. And we need to take action now before it's too late, before opportunities are blocked off for new entrants to come in and have the opportunity to succeed. County council farms are often the crucial starting point. Many of today's successful farmers started on a county council farm, and we need to retain what we've got, and we need to ensure that through the larger estates in Britain, the next step in the farming ladder is still available. Farms of 200, 300, 400 acres are retained rather than just merged into ever larger units. So we're facing a really important challenge, and I'm looking forward to the discussion later. I think that's probably enough from me, Charles. Thank you.
Don, thank you for those insightful comments, and thank you also for your continuing support over for many years for this sector of the industry. I'm now going to move over to Graham Willis, the agricultural lead at the CPRE, who has been instrumental in driving this whole initiative forward. Who's going to talk us through the report's key findings and its vision. So, Graham, over to you.
Thank you, Charles, and thank you for that introduction. I will try and cover some of the key issues and the themes of the vision itself and the recommendations. I'm bound to fail in such a short time, but I will undersell, I'm sure, issues of diversity, community, and levelling up and access. So I hope other people will speak on that later. I'm sure they will, and colleagues. So Lord Curry set out the challenging context for farming and the value of council farms nationally as a strategic asset. But I think despite this level of challenge, crises that we're facing also generate opportunities, particularly to think and do differently, and especially in policy terms, which is very much my focus now in this work. So if the challenges are extreme, then we need more than ever, I think, to think and do strategically and for the long term. And dare I say it, I don't think policy on council farms has, in their lost in recent decades and the last decade, actually been short-termist, and they have literally been undersold short. So this version emerged from our earlier project and the report that came out of that, Reviving County Farms, and that advocated for a new positive vision for council farms for the 21st century, and one that recognises their value, rejuvenates their purpose, and puts in place the long-term protection, funding and support that they need to flourish for all the very important reasons that Charles and Don have already set out. So we've started that process of, I think, rejuvenating their purpose and recognising their value, and I hope this webinar will help us set the direction for that long-term funding and protection, which we need government, very importantly, to put in place. So Don's 2008 report, the Future Farming report in 2013, and Future Food and Farming and Countryside Commission work has flagged up the importance of council farms, recognising the value, if I can speak to that first point, as a crucial entry point to farming, but also pointed out benefits of council farms for people, for welfare, for nature and the wider environment. Now, one of the things I found really interesting doing this work with colleagues Kate and Chris and Kim from Shared Assets and NEF was identifying new data from the CAAV lettings reports, which I hadn't seen in the public domain, which I think surprised me about how acre for acre, hectare for hectare, how important council farms are for supporting new people into farming, that very central purpose that legislation sets out. So given they're 1% of the countryside of England and Wales, 100,000 hectares roughly, we estimate they're actually 10 to 40 times more important than that in what they deliver for young people into farming and building the steps of that ladder that Don talked about so eloquently. So from that 2019, the latest data from CAAV, over 1 in 10 of all new tenancies were offered by council farms, over 12% of all farmland let that year, 2-year longer average tenancies than any other landowner type over a longer run period as well. 1 in 6 of all lettings to new entrants. We can discuss the definition of that, I'm sure, in due course. And 2/5 of all farms let with buildings and a home. So important for people to start a business in their own right, as Charles pointed out. In terms of rejuvenating that purpose, the purpose of council farms, of course, set out in legislation going way back to the 1890s, was to give the opportunity to people to start their own farm. Those were times of agricultural depression, war in Europe, and the Spanish flu epidemic. So how things have changed. We're still facing all those cyclical cruelties of history, plus the two main challenges, twin challenges of climate change, adapting and tackling climate change, and also helping nature recovery and helping nature to help farming function better. But with war in Ukraine, as Don said, and climate change, actually we've got a third very important present threat, which is to secure a sustainable supply of wholesome food. And COVID, with recognition of the need for great access to green space, mental and health and well-being, and the benefits of nature for those, and therapeutic benefits of nature. So all those elements, I think, are in the vision and are extremely important for the sort of way that we think that the purposes of council farms should be reframed, partly because of the way that public policy is now reframing the way land needs to be used. Farmland is an extremely precious asset. We now know that it needs to be used for multiple purposes alongside food production. Public policy recognises this. That's what the profound shift to public goods for public money embodies. But we can ask, why is council farmland any different from other farmland in this? So I think one of the key things in the vision is why council farms are special. We argue they're special, they have a special nature for 3 or 4 main reasons. The land in the public domain, actually municipal farmland we're talking about here today, can have its purposes shaped democratically for tackling those wider public challenges. And government land and public land in municipal ownership can actually be managed in partnership with tenants so that government can walk the walk on the policies it's delivering nationally and locally. At all levels, government has huge convening power still, even at local authority level. And that means councils and government can bring together networks of tenants and farmers and producers, but also local organisations and suppliers and schools, care homes, hospitals, to provide access to producers into those, providing services, be it food or other services, care services. If you look at the great example of Animal Antics in the report, a council farm supporting therapy for young people with anxiety and who've left school and other mental health problems, or renewable fuels from fused methane, as the study in Cornwall, or Stephen Briggs, you'll all know, his work on agroforestry and agroecological farming. A third point is the way that government acts as the lender of last resort in times of crisis, along with the Bank of England. I think council farms have acted as, in the same way they de-risk activity in the economy, council farms can play a very important role in de-risking the activity of new young farmers, which conventional landowners may not want to take on for very many reasons. And maybe that role could be extended to de-risking new people coming in to try new practices, be that community forms of farming or agroecological and regenerative types of farming, which still need support to scale up and to be mainstream. And some brilliant people like Martin doing that work here today. And fourthly, government policy is about public goods for public money. So why isn't it we value council farms for that same policy thrust, which is so important? they need to be valued holistically, so we can optimize that delivery, but also so they're supported for a much wider range of purposes. So lastly, to wrap things up, I want to talk about putting in place that long-term protection, funding and support to make council farms flourish. So speak to that aim. The vision picks up on issues we identified talking to councils, council officers, the tenants, prospective tenants. So we saw that austerity is hitting council budgets. There's a lack of purpose for the 21st century and indeed for the 2030s and 2040s for council farms. There's a lack of awareness of what land is held where, by awareness in the public and councils indeed, and what benefits it delivers, which would better garner their support for council farms. We have very narrowly defined information available publicly in the reports to Parliament, and that could do so much more to illustrate their benefits, not least to new entrants, but for all the other public benefits I mentioned. And lastly, there's a tension between enabling tenants to build their businesses and stay on farm, but also creating new chances of new people. And we've tried to address all those in the vision, which I hope you've had a chance to read. I can't repeat all the elements of it here, but we've covered, I hope, some of those or all of those issues and I think compiled them into what I hope you feel is a persuasive and compelling picture of how it could be otherwise. And without having time to go over all the recommendations, I think three stand out for me at the moment. Firstly, the need to build a new consensus around a national purpose for our council farms estates, but one which crucially allows local authorities to interpret that and shape it to the idiosyncrasies of their estates, which can be very different across the country, and have a clear focus for the next 10 to 20 years. Secondly, the need for much better public information about what those farms deliver, measures, reports and promotion of the great things council farms can do so that local people can value them, councillors value them, and get a real connection to that land through food, through care, through services, through access, through visits. And lastly, the need for long-term sustained funding, which I hope Henry can talk to today, to secure them, to stabilise what we have, enable councils to manage, to plan and invest for the future, to modify the opportunities to enhance their estates and offer far more opportunities to do some extraordinary things. Just to finish, Charles often has said before at an ACES meeting that this is holding up a mirror to council farms and what they do. I like to twist that metaphor and say it's holding up a prism to council farms and throwing out the other side a wonderful rainbow of opportunities. If we can look forward to a very positive future at this time of change, I would be very happy indeed. Thank you.
Graham, you finished on a really uplifting note, a rainbow of opportunities. I really like that. And you mentioned that you felt the report was compelling and persuasive. Certainly from my perspective, it most certainly is. So thank you. So we move on to our third main speaker, which is Henry Levinson-Gower, Head of New Entrant Support Policy at DEFRA. Henry, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me here. As with previous speakers, I will try and be short to allow for discussion, questions, and so forth. But I think the first thing I'd say is that the leadership role of council farms has, from the beginning of the work to support new entrants, been recognised. In our first statement in the Agricultural Transition Plan, council farms were front and centre of the vision for developing support to provide long-lasting opportunities to new entrants. And also, what we recognise is that now more than ever, we need fresh thinking, we need new models, new ways of doing things, given the government's policies to change how land is managed towards delivering public benefits as much as private benefits. And we need new models that integrate those two types of objective so that we can deliver them as efficiently and as effectively. And at the same time, of course, the economic context is changing dramatically. So we've been working over the last year through a co-design process with council farms at the centre of that to try and understand better what is really needed to support new entrants at this point. And I suppose actually one of the key things that came out of that is the challenge of progression. That actually it's all very well creating, having council farms for new entrants, if you like, to come in one end, but unless there are ways of them moving on, progressing to new opportunities beyond council farms after a reasonable sort of growing up period, if you like, then you effectively get a total blockage and you reduce new entrants. Basically, new entrants then are only sort of replacing dead men's shoes, more or less, or dead people's shoes, let's say, but probably mostly men, rather than having a continuous flow through. And we also discovered that finance was a really important space as well. So out of that initial co-design, that created basically a need to provide better support to develop these innovative, fresh thinking ideas we needed, at the same time as a recognition that there was a need to engage with the wider set of landowners to provide opportunities outside council farms as well as council farms, and to increase the potential to engage with providers of finance. And decision was taken, as you know, by the Secretary of State that he wanted to actually pilot these ideas coming from the co-design process. And so we're now currently working through what those pilots are going to look like. And we very much hope and expect from conversations we've had that council farms, again, will be major players in that process. Now, of course, the pilots, which we hope to run over the next winter, will then feed into further decisions. And I think the key thing about the pilots, which actually is an approach that government has taken across the piece with developing all the range of new policies in the sort of agri-environmental space, ELM and so on, I hope will provide the basis for that long-term outlook and support that Graham has talked about. Because obviously you and many others we've been working with and for are very expert and knowledgeable in this whole area about what new entrants need. But there is a wider set of people who may not be so aware, and we can only convince them, such as the Treasury, if it's about long-term support, if we have the substantial and extended database. And actually, for instance, one of the key things that is still on the table to look at are capital grant support. But only recently a report came out from Scotland that suggested their programmes had largely been a failure. And we know from talking to Welsh colleagues as well as that they think the same. So we are in a challenging situation to get the evidence and the data to support these sorts of initiatives in that context. We're also just about to bring out the latest report on council farms. And I was interested in Graham's comment that maybe we should extend and build that report because it is sort of based on a sort of standard reporting approach. And it has slightly, unfortunately, there are fewer council farms that have provided returns this year than last, which is a big disappointment. And maybe if we regenerate them with, and think what more might be in them, though of course we then will need council farms to provide data, which and obviously there is a challenge with provision of the current data. But I think that is an interesting point, and it links to that wider point that we're in a new world where it's not just about new entrants and producing food, it's also about providing wider public benefits, environmental outcomes. And I think thinking how to measure them and council farms' role in that, because on the face of it, it is quite challenging, because if you've got a small plot, managing it for natural capital as well, finding space for that is challenging. And also a lot of the thinking on agroecology is about moving livestock around over bigger bits of land. So you're moving nutrients around and regenerating land. and how that can be done on council farms where each particular plot is relatively small. So I think there are future challenges in terms of making that real, in terms of delivering those environmental benefits. But we see and will continue to see council farms as a key part of supporting new entrants, and in the further development, the pilots and the co-evaluation, co-learning from those pilots, which will hopefully provide the basis for a longer term policy from government in support in this area. Thank you.
Henry, thank you so much for that input. It really is refreshing to have DEFRA so engaged in this process, and I'm sure we all very much look forward to seeing the outcomes of these pilot initiatives. Those are the three main speakers. We now have the opportunity to hear briefly from two more, and the first I'm going to invite to say a few words is George Dunn, who I'm sure doesn't need any introduction to anyone. So George, the screen is yours.
Charles, thank you so much, and thank you to CPRE for the invite to be with you today. I think as Dawn and Charles both said, we've been talking about these issues for donkey's years, and I think whilst I absolutely wholeheartedly welcome this report from CPRE, it does bring me some sadness, because I think that we bear a collective responsibility in not being able to do more to protect and support and enhance and to allow our county farms network to thrive. We've, as I said, we've been talking about this for a long period of time, and it's one of those national treasures. It's talked about lovingly by MPs like Kerry, who's on the call today, by peers, Dawn, who's on the call today, by royalty. Prince Charles has often talked about county farms estates, by charities like CPRE, by lobby groups like TFA and NFU, by academics, by the media. Nobody says a bad word about county farms. They all say what a wonderful thing it is, and yet we see it year on year frittered away by inappropriate decisions made at a local level without adequate scrutiny from central government. If we want to really talk about the detail here and talk about the benefits and the losses, let's ask the people of Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire who sold their estates in the 1980s for 300 quid an acre, whether they feel the benefit of that sell-off in the 1980s. Let's talk to the people of Herefordshire who only recently sold off their estate. Have they felt the benefit of that in their local economy and their local environment? Or Somerset? I doubt it very much. Those local authorities that really champion what they are doing with their county farms estates, involve their cabinets, involve their members, involve the public, are the ones that are still doing well. And those that are living below the radar, trying to avoid the scrutiny, of the ones that we're losing, and that's where we're seeing the issues. So I would challenge local authorities and local authority managers to be more upbeat about their estates, to raise them up to be really important, really vibrant things, and therefore they form part of the local story, the local narrative, because they are part of the local community. And also central government, Henry, DEFRA's got to do a lot more to be more scrutinizing of what local authorities are doing. The most dreadful decision we've had recently was Herefordshire, when all of the reports, all of the recommendations were to retain and to rationalize, but the local authority took a political decision to sell that estate under the eyes of all of us, charities, academics, MPs, peers, civil servants, and that, frankly, was a disgrace. So I welcome this report, but we need to move from the sort of joyous debates that we're having today to seeing some really, really important changes in this policy environment. Otherwise, we'll be having another report in 20 years' time with another 20,000 acres or more of the land disappearing. Sorry if that sounds a bit stark, Graham, and Charles, but that's my analysis. Thank you.
George, I would not expected anything less from you, but I think it's injected, a real balance and rigour to the debate in terms of that starkness. I'm now going to invite Kate Swade, another co-author of this report from Shared Assets, to say a few words. So, Kate, over to you.
Thanks, Charles. Morning, everybody. yeah, I would echo everything that has been said. And firstly, just to say that from a shared assets point of view, we're a think and do tank that is all about reimagining what we can do with land together, and particularly thinking about land as a system. And I think George has brought in a really important thing here, that none of this, county farms don't exist in a vacuum. And a lot of the decisions that are being made about county farms are not being made about their value as farms. They're being made about balancing the books and about thinking about, bringing in cash into an environment of austerity. And as we pointed out in the report, those maybe aren't the right decisions. Actually, if people had held on, if councils had held on to some of those estates, their balance sheets would be significantly healthier now than they were for selling at £300 an acre. And I suppose the thing I want to kind of inject into this is thinking about, this is a vision for 2040. We've got a huge amount of turmoil that's going to be happening over the next 15 years, but certainly over the next 3 to 4 to 5 years. But actually, if we can think about where do we really want to be, we at Shared Assets would be arguing that we need to be starting every decision, particularly about public land, with the land itself. And what does the land need, and what do the people on and around the land need? And yet I can see huge opportunities for councils if they can disentangle themselves from the kind of deadlock of austerity and selling assets being the only way out of that, which I appreciate is a difficult thing to disentangle yourself from. But if they can do that, they can step into a real leadership position here around creating the future that we all say we want to see, where we have a regenerative and replenishing food system that supports a huge diversity of people into the farming profession, and that looks after our land in ways that safeguard all of us for the future. But until we can disentangle ourselves from this worldview of seeing land purely as an asset and move into seeing land as something that actually we are in a relationship with and that supports us, I don't think we're ever going to get there. So I'm really pleased to have been part of this project. I'm really pleased and would like to give massive thanks to Graham, who really led the kind of pulling together of all of this over the past few months. It's been a really epic piece of work for him. And yeah, I really hope that this starts a debate and some action, as George says, around properly valuing this national asset and enhancing it and adding to it. And that also local authorities kind of really pick up on, all of the recommendations, obviously, but just to highlight recommendation 9 about actually being able to use this as an opportunity to fully diversify who has access to land for farming in this country, and recognizing that access to land, as with many other things, is a justice issue, actually, and that local authorities have a real opportunity to show some leadership there. So yeah, that's where we're coming from.
Kate, thank you so much for that insight and that input. Right, we've now concluded all the main set piece presentations, and now, as they say, it's over to you. We've got about 25-30 minutes or so for open discussion, really, and it's focusing upon what do we need to do to realise this vision? What do we need to do to make this a reality? So I really do encourage as many people as possible to have their say. If you can keep it reasonably short and brief, that will be helpful, because that will enable as many people as possible to have their say. If you can use the raised hand facility on your screen, that will assist me. I've got a list of everybody and I will try and bring you in as you want. So who really wants to kick this off? I can't see any hands at the moment. It's a bit like an auctioneer waiting for bids for the Nick Millard.
Thank you, Charles. Firstly, I'd like to echo what's been said before and congratulate the authors on what I think is a very stimulating and inspiring report. I'm afraid that I'm going to be a wee bit like George, just to point out a couple of very practical things I think that we need to do. And I suppose amongst anybody on the call, I'm probably the most guilty here drawing George's responsibility point, because I was in private practice as a consultant to a number of councils, but I hope I saved as many farms as I sold. I think the two very practical points are, if I was still in practice, I would expect some telephone calls within the next week from councils who are at the tending towards the disposal end of activity, saying we ought to get on with things before this gets any traction. And the other thing is that, as has been mentioned a couple of times previously, the really tricky bit is around progression. So I think the two important things to do, if I might suggest, are to put some flesh on the bones of the wider valuation issue, so that can be explained fairly rapidly to councils, and also to make sure that when the report is published more widely, there are some places it's published without county farms in the title, or without county farms in the tagline, and it actually says things like reimagining the tenanted sector, just to make people look more widely. Because if, as Lord Curry mentioned, the steps or the rungs on the ladder weren't quite as big, then there wouldn't be quite as many difficulties, and I wouldn't have been faced with meeting councillors who asked me what the point was of having an estate with tenants who were supposedly new entrants, but were mainly in their 60s and 70s. But just to go back to my first point, I think it's a cracking piece of work, and I congratulate everybody involved. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for your contribution on the steering group on this as well. The next speaker I've got up is Claudia Grist. Claudia.
Oh, hi. I'm actually here for James Morford, the chairman of the Family Farmers Association, who couldn't make it this morning. There are two things I wanted to say. One, I had a look at the Suffolk County Council latest vision for council farms, and I was pretty horrified to see that it was very heavily weighted towards selling off parts of the estate and to commercial exploitation of any kind, and a very strong orientation towards business plans and, you know, successful bringing in of revenues from the council farms. So as a, you know, non-farmer and obviously only involved in the Family Farmers Association, where we have similar problems, my question would be, what can we all jointly politically do to make this a much stronger message and actually change such policies, as this was quite a recent one.
Claudia, thank you for that, and let's leave that question hanging for the moment. Something to come back onto. The next speaker I've got is Louise Staples. Louise.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. I'm sorry, I'm just going to really follow, I think, actually what George and even Claudia has just said. Obviously, the NFU was really involved with the work in trying to save the Hereford estate, you know, and we still didn't manage it. And you know, we spent probably nearly 2 years there trying to turn that around and work with Hereford Council. And just, you know, I know exactly what Claudia has seen in regard to Suffolk. So I think unless we can get, councils to follow what we're thinking and to look at this vision, but I think we are also going to need much more help from government with a political change to make this happen as well.
Louise,
thank you.
Thank you for those comments. And next to Johnny Alford from Cornwall, who has the benefit of actually having to put a lot of this into practice and manage these estates. So morning, Johnny, how are you? And over to you.
Morning, Charles. Yeah, Johnny Alford, Cornwall Council, one of the lead officers on delivering the council farm strategy. So first of all, thank you, Graham, for the hard work and for the report. It's been really encouraging to see the mirror shone on the council farms estate, for us to see, looking into that mirror, how we are perceived. I'm really encouraged that you have been able to identify that we are punching well above our weight as a national estate in terms of the new entrant opportunities and in particular around the fully equipped holdings that we are able to let compared to the rest of the agricultural sector. So council farms really do deliver something well above their weight in terms of letting opportunity. So thank you for identifying that. Thank you for showcasing Cornwall, in particular our 20-year vision. And if any local authority is looking for some hooks to hang a vision on, then perhaps the 4 ambitions that we've set out may be a starting point for that. These farms are here, first of all, to generate food and produce food, and that goes to Don's point about globalization. They're also there to create new opportunities for young people. We've always said young people, but I think the diversity point we heard in that very last speaker, who are the future tenants? Will it be groups? Will it be CSAs? Will it be mixed groups of people with a similar vision as opposed to the more traditional model? I think we're beginning to open our eyes to a different tenant model. Environmental growth and sits at the heart of government policy. So sits at the heart of what we need to do. And finally, it's about vibrant communities. And one thing that can be thrown at council farms estates as a negative is that it only effectively supports the few farming families that we have. But the vibrant community model ensures that council farms sit at the very centre of local communities, and that in itself strengthens its call and strengthens its voice. And so I think the 4 ambitions Cornwall have identified perhaps give a shape to future authority policies reading through Graham's report. So we do really welcome this report. It is a challenging world to be a local authority farms manager. The challenge of generating capital, identifying capital, and of managing revenue in a local authority where the ambitions and the challenges are multiple around vulnerable adults, housing, education, etc. So trying to keep the voice of council farms at the top of the agenda is hard. But these sorts of reports coming from outside of the council farms world are really helpful and powerful in doing this. So thank you for what's been done in this report.
Johnny, thank you. And thank you for also bringing in the community dimension, which I think illustrates new thinking. So what better can I do than invite Susie from the CSA network to contribute? So Susie, over to you.
Thanks, Charles. And yeah, thanks, Graham, for the report. It's great. And thanks, Johnny. You've basically said what I was going to say. So perfect to go after you. Yeah, many of our larger farms are run by people who started on small farms. From a community supported agriculture point of view, we need council farms to split off small sections into 5-hectare units or even smaller, that starter farms can work. We're only 55%, as I'm sure you all know, 55% self-sufficient in fresh vegetables and less than 20% in fruit. CSA, small market garden, community supported agriculture farms are a brilliant way of producing the fruit and vegetables we need locally and involving people in thinking about that. For that, we also need accommodation. One of the biggest problems for our growers and farmers is finding affordable accommodation. So any ways that government can support that in county farm estates would be great, and startup grants to support. So for community supported agriculture farms, a £50,000 startup grant over 3 years can make the difference between that farm surviving for 20 years or not. And finally, I think picking up on the point that Johnny just made, the thing that supports our CSA farms the most is the sense of belonging that is shared amongst the farmers and growers and their members and the people that consume from those farms. So as a group, as a population, the more we can build that sense of belonging and the sense of this amazing resource that we have and share in our county farms, the better. Thanks.
Susie, thank you so much for that contribution. I can't actually see any other hands raised at the moment. So I wondered if there's anyone else. Oh, Ollie, over to you.
And Sarah too.
And Sarah, yes. So Ollie first. Ollie Rodker.
Sorry, too many different buttons on the screen. Morning, everybody. I'm from the Ecological Land Cooperative. We're a social enterprise that set up new small farms. And in a way, we started setting up 15 years ago because we could see that the county farm estate was shrinking and was not fulfilling its potential. And you know, we've been trying for the last 10 or 15 years to set up rungs on the ladder to provide some of this progression, and we've made progress with that, but it's incredibly hard and challenging, as everybody here knows. I want to build on what George Dunn said at the beginning, and partly Claudia's plea for sort of working together. I'm also on the co-design team that Henry is leading, and I have to say I was hoping Henry might announce something slightly more concrete this morning about the support for county farms. I know Henry is very supportive, and I know there's a lot of support within government, but so far we're not actually seeing you know, money where mouths are, and real policies. And there's a lot of hope, but there's not a lot of action, to be honest. And I think we have to be honest and respectful, but name that and say, you know, when is it going to happen? And Henry knows that there's some disappointment within the co-design team that we haven't got more commitments yet, and there's an ongoing debate with him and the rest of the team about how we can see more and what that team can do. But in the absence of more action from government, which is absolutely essential and you know, the first thing that we need, but if we're not going to get that, then then my next thought is that other organizations have to find ways to work together to do this themselves. And that means organizations like my own, like the CSA network, like community organizations, maybe tenant farmers, the NFU, working with local authorities to find ways that we can help each other just to do this and to make good examples. And I think where there are good examples, other local authorities who are less committed and less concerned may follow suit. And so I suppose my sort of hope out of this report, which we certainly, you know, is great to see and fully support, but our hope is that this report can lead to a real coherent meeting of minds and working on the nuts and bolts of getting these county farms to fulfill more of their potential and to do more, all of the things that we already know. And maybe out of this, there can be some further meetings or discussions about how to do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ollie. I'm going to bring back in Henry because I suspect you want to respond on that before I bring in Sarah. So Henry.
Yeah, just to say, we are trying to get to the point where we can announce something. For anyone who's worked in central government, you'll understand that there are all sorts of hoops you have to jump for until before you get hold of the money. Business cases. We now have a strategic business case, we have an outline business case, and we have a final business case, plus all sorts of other stuff. So, but we do realise that in order to make these pilots happen or allow them to happen over the coming winter, we need to get out to look for bids to hold the pilots, you know, with reasonable time. So we're aiming for May when we put out formal calls. But we should quite soon be able to start with what they call market engagement, which to talk to people more about and find out more about who's up for bidding and so on. So it is in process, and I do apologise. Government moves slowly in these things, but hopefully the pilots and other work that we're going to continue in parallel will give us the basis for this longer term perspective and programs that Graham has talked about.
Thank you, Henry. Sarah, Sarah Palmer at National Federation of Young Farmers Clubs. You had your hand up a moment ago. Do you want to say anything?
Thank you, Charles, and thank you, Graham, very much for this morning. I hope the report that NFYFC launched last week, I hope the findings from the Future Land Use Research Project help with your report. And very briefly, I think most people, whether it's young farmers, whether it's the Land Workers Alliance, people involved with community projects, have a very, very sincere interest in food production and food security. That's one of the things we found in our research. And also business viability equals environmental viability. So again, future support and future collaboration are going to be very welcome. So thank you for inviting me to this launch, and good luck with what DEFRA is going to be proposing and delivering. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. We do have a few minutes left. I can't see any other hands at the moment. Is there anyone else who would like to say? Yes, Claudia, again.
Yeah, sorry for taking up 2 slots. I've only read the executive summary of the report, so maybe my questions are answered in the wider report. I would like to ask the gentleman from Cornwall County Council, how did they manage to get such a brilliant future vision through all the political and economic interests? I mean, it sounded amazing.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll come back to that in a moment, and I'll ask Johnny to speak. But Don, you wanted to say a few more words.
Just to add that Henry and myself and others have been discussing this whole issue of the farming ladder, and I and others are willing to put pressure on the larger estates particularly to rethink some of their policies in terms of merging farms and retaining smaller farms, so that we do have that opportunity outside of the county council farm structure to allow farmers who have ambition, people who have proved themselves over a period of years on a county council farm, to move on. And I think there's a need to do that, and certainly having talked to a number of larger estates, there's a willingness to listen, to hopefully address some of the existing policies that have prevented that from happening.
Don, thank you for that. I think that's a really important contribution. I can recall from my time managing Gloucestershire County Council estate that we did actually have a long-term established relationship with one large estate where we had nomination rights to one of their farms when it became available, and we did exploit that. George, you wanted to come back in again.
Yeah, just very quickly, Charles, to give a very positive example of what Lord Curry's just been talking about. A few years ago, there was a very large dairy farm in Cornwall that became available on the Duchy of Cornwall estate. There was a discussion about whether it should be sort of split up for new entrants, etc. In the end, through various discussions, the Duchy decided to keep it as a progression unit. And what happened was that they were able to move another smaller Duchy tenant into that larger dairy holding. The smaller Duchy unit became free, and it was taken by someone from the Devon County Council estate, and the farm that was vacated on the Devon County Council estate went to a new entrant. So the ladder does work and can work, and just needs people to think about it more constructively. And we need many, many more of those types of examples, because that's where we see things working.
Thank you, George. We are fast running out of time, so is there anyone else who wishes to contribute to the debate this morning? I can't see anyone else, in which case I will. Graham, sorry, Graham, would you like to come back? Graham,
no, I think you're probably going to come back to me briefly, Charles, anyway. So, I mean, the few minutes are left. One of the things I was going to say is that in the project, we did envisage having some face-to-face meetings. I'm enormously grateful for everyone on this call for contributing today, but for all their work helping us in the past, and they will know who they are. But we did have resource to do some face-to-face meetings. So it would be good if we can follow this up with seeing if there is appetite, like Ollie was saying, for getting together to having more detailed conversations about what practically can be done. Obviously, we'll be disseminating the vision more widely through people like Johnny and ACES, the ACES network, and their magazine, and that is brilliant. But I'm aware that this is an extraordinarily challenging area to work in, because it has quite a lot of technical aspects to it, which are known much better by many people on this call than myself. But it also is trying to bridge through to creating, I hate the word narrative, but maybe a story about place and people and the vibrancy of communities that Johnny talked about, which is really, really important to get across, both to get wider political support, but public support locally to make things happen. And we're very aware of that at CPRE, about how we have to do both those things. So I think that is the challenge we've tried to bridge in the vision, but we do need to get it out there. So please do stay in touch, and I will get in touch afterwards, see if there's an appetite for a face-to-face meeting with some or all of us, where we can hammer out some of these issues in more detail and put together a greater plan of action. I know everyone's incredibly busy, so I value your time immensely, and thank you today for what has been a very, very stimulating discussion from my perspective, and many kind words too. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. This report does require wide publication and dissemination. It's extremely well researched, a written report. For those of you who haven't read the full report, I do commend it to you. Just a concluding comment from me, I can recall going back that it was in 1966 that the WISE committee produced their report on the future direction for county farms. I mean, that's 56 years ago. The recommendations for that were contained in the 1970 Agriculture Act, and that is very largely remains the foundation and the policy framework within which council farms operate. The world has moved forward in various revolutions since then, and certainly the agricultural industry has done so as well. So let us use this report and this opportunity to regalvanize and re-energize this important sector of the industry to ensure that we can continue to have a steady stream of ambitious and able creative people with ideas and enthusiasm, coming back to something I said in opening, to ensure that they make a vital contribution to food production and local communities. So with that, and about a minute to 10 o'clock, unless there's anyone else wanting to have the final say, I'm going to thank everybody for attending. Thank you to Anastasia for organising it, and thank you to Graham and the team for all the work that they've done. So it finally leaves me to say thank you and au revoir, and enjoy the rest of the day. So thank you very much. Bye.
Oops. Thank you, Charles.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.